Thanks, Enrique. Hey, everybody. As Enrique mentioned, my plan for this is to talk for 15 minutes or so, share some of my kind of golden nuggets that I've learned about buying HR tech, and then open it up to questions. So please, if you have questions as I go through this first 15 minutes or just in general, shoot them over in the chat and we will start running through those as efficiently as possible towards the end. To give you a little background on myself, I started my career off working in venture capital, doing early stage software investing, went to business school, got my MBA, taught myself how to program, always wanted to start a business. And so started an HR tech company about 6 or 7 years ago that is now run by a general manager, and had the startup bug, wanted to start another business. And so my day-to-day, I run this website called Select Software Reviews, which basically is just in-depth, unbiased reviews of different HR tech vendors. I think it's really, really hard to decide what technology to buy. There's so much information out there on the internet. Much of it is a little bit sketchy at best. And so what we try to do is just in-depth, unbiased sort of content. And then we do some advertising on the site to keep the lights on. So that's sort of where I'm coming from with this. And I guess, it's kind of an interesting time to think about buying HR technology. I had a conversation this morning with somebody who runs a small staffing firm whose business is basically dried up considerably. And I think most people are in that sort of realm, whether you are on the corporate side or a third-party recruiter. More or less, recruiting has slowed down a lot unless you're in a few different industries, right? Like healthcare, mortgages, et cetera. And so it's a really amazing time to think about those long-term projects that you've been pushing off that you need to get done, and the payback will be there. It'll just take a little bit of time, and that's why you probably push them back. For me, in my own personal life, like one of those things was getting some new furniture, is something that I've been putting off for like 9 months and just haven't been able to pull the trigger. And then from a business perspective, it's re-architecting the technology of my own business and really thinking long-term about what are the vendors that I want to use to accomplish my goals. And I think that's a great thing to do from a HR recruiting perspective as well. For some folks, they might be thinking about video interviewing or other sort of virtual HR tools, and that's great. We can talk about a couple of tools and tactics to be effective in that vein. And then in general, I think people, like the guy that I talked to this morning, he's looking at a new ATS/CRM for his business. Talk to other folks who are thinking through just sort of the blocking and tackling stuff of HR and recruiting, from background checks to HRIS, and then some more specific things like sourcing technology, et cetera. My goal today is to share information that's going to be useful no matter what sort of tool you're going after. And so again, I'm going to talk for the next probably like 12-ish minutes about some of those specific tactics that will help you to be more effective. I hope you walk away with one or two that you think is really phenomenal. And then feel free to ask any questions, and we'll call Enrique in to relay those questions in a couple of minutes. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is something that I call the cross-functional buying committee, which sort of sounds like a bunch of like business mumbo jumbo, but in my opinion is probably one of the most effective tools that HR can use to buy technology, especially larger purchases. And so the way this works is you get people from across the organization who are interested in the initiative that you're pursuing to help you out. So let's just pretend that it's employer branding. In general, you want to work on your employer brand. And this is one of those things where you're probably going to need to carve out new budget. You're going to need to get buy-in from people across the organization and marketing, probably in all functions realistically. And it's also something that kind of secretly, there's a lot of people in your organization who have like a latent interest in employer branding because they've gone through recruiting processes. They are probably hiring managers themselves. They care about the growth of the business. And so putting it out there on Slack, on email, at an all hands meeting, which probably isn't happening now, but some sort of virtual all hands meeting, that you're going to run this employer branding initiative over the next 6 or 12 months to try to increase the employer brand in order to get the right people in the organization. And if anybody's interested, just kind of let me know. And I'd love to have you as on an advisory board. you'll be very surprised at the people who say, you know what, I'd be pretty interested in helping out with that. And the goal should be to get 3 to 6 people who are from across the organization in fairly senior levels. They're probably not going to be C-level or VP level folks, but they'll probably be, directors or managers. And importantly, they're kind of going to be like the go-getters of the organization, because nobody's volunteering for work, for extra work, unless they're sort of interested in helping the company in general, and probably pretty like type A motivated sort of person that has a lot of internal credibility. So you get those folks together, you have a meeting up front, you're like, hey, this is why I'm interested in doing this thing. We've got like this competitive dynamic, or, in general, here's the state of our employer branding. Our careers page is terrible. Our candidate experience is terrible. Glassdoor, blah, blah, blah. Let's do a brainstorming session. Let's get some ideas together. And you've got your own ideas, obviously, right? It's probably fixing those problems that you've identified. And what's cool is that you're going to get the benefit of diversity of thought. You're going to get somebody from marketing who has different ideas, somebody from engineering who has different ideas. And so that set of potential things to pursue to address your initiative is going to be much better. And that's one of the key benefits of having one of these cross-functional buying or initiatives committees. The second key part is that when you go to get the budget, you are going to have some nice allies that can go to bat for you. And again, these are folks who are well respected throughout the organization, who probably have gotten budget for different initiatives in the past and kind of can help you talk to the people that have the purse strings. And so when you want to hire an outside agency to redo your career site, or spend money on your Glassdoor profile, or whatever the case may be for this fictitious employer branding initiative. And of course, I hope it's clear that this sort of works across any different initiative, whether it's culture, recruiting, diversity recruiting, you name it. You're going to have people that can go to the CFO and say, hey, we're all aligned on this. We need X amount of money, and we all really feel strongly that this is going to provide value to the organization. And so all of a sudden you have all these allies, which are going to help you get budget. And then the last kind of key benefit of these cross-functional buying committees is that they're also going to help you implement the technology in a much more robust way. So if you think about a lot of HR tech, it requires the buy-in from your employees, the rest of the organization. And so if you want everybody, let's say you need everybody in marketing to do something, to use a recognition system, to leave reviews on Glassdoor, to do employee testimonials, to do referrals, like whatever your thing is, more likely than not, you need most of the organization to actually buy in. And I think it's one thing when it comes from HR, and it can be a little bit more powerful if it's either reiterated or directly communicated through that leader in the function who is part of your committee, who throughout this whole process had been spending 1 or 2 or 3 hours a month in these sort of like brainstorm and check-in meetings with you, who's been along for the journey, who says, hey guys, we're doing this new Glassdoor review campaign. Here's why we're doing it. It takes 10 minutes. Please help us out and do this. And it just sort of helps you to increase that engagement, adoption, and therefore success over time. So that's one of the major sort of key tactics and strategies that I think is super, super helpful when buying new HR technology, especially things that cost a lot, that budget is an issue, especially things that are new, especially things that require a rollout across the organization. So again, if any questions on that, put them in the chat. Enrique is going to pop back in here in a couple minutes and we'll go through them all. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is, in general, return on investment calculations. I'm sort of like a finance nerd. I've always been interested in finance and numbers. It's just sort of how my brain works. I started trading stocks when I was 12 years old. I worked in venture capital. I went to Harvard Business School to get my MBA. It's just sort of like how my brain works. And I think it's how the brain of many CFOs work. They're sort of, at least the way I like to think about them is, and maybe this is a bit pessimistic, but they're sort of like these cold-hearted capitalists who are like, yeah, it's great that this new initiative will have a better candidate experience, but I don't really care about that. The thing that I care about is the P&L. That's kind of how I get compensated at the end of the day, right? Like, did we deploy budget in the right way? And therefore, it's incumbent upon anybody in the organization to make the case in dollars and cents that this new initiative that you're going to pursue is going to have an impact on your business. And the challenging thing is, from HR's perspective, and I'm saying HR, it means people ops, it means recruiting, it means everything, right? But the challenging thing is, one, there's a higher bar. And it's not fair, but most CFOs view HR and recruiting as a cost center. And that's especially true in the environment that we're in. And that's why most of your teams are very understaffed and they're overworked and they're asked to do a lot more with a lot less in terms of tools and resources than every other function. It also means that there's a higher bar to get new budget. And so I think it's really important to quantify the impact to revenue and to cost savings that any initiative that you do will have on the organization. And my pro tip here is to find somebody in your company that thinks in this way and make an ally of them so that they can help you put together these sort of business cases. It's probably somebody that worked at a consulting firm or has an MBA or maybe works in finance, and they just sort of intuitively understand, okay, if we get a new career website, that's going to increase the conversion rate on our career website, which leads to more applicants. Our value per applicant is our cost per hire divided by our app to hire ratio, and therefore XYZ is the amount of money that comes out the back end. That person is going to really help you to articulate the case, build an Excel model, stress test your assumptions, especially if you've never done something like this before. And probably after doing 2 or 3 of these, you're going to get the hang of it. There is a page on our website, selectsoftwarereviews.com, that is all about HR tech ROI and has lots of calculators and videos that explain the calculators. And so if you're looking at something that's going to decrease time to fill, or you're looking at video interviews or all these HR chatbots, et cetera, we've got a calculator for most of these things, and you can download them, you can use them yourself, you can change them for your organization. But I really think it's important to build somebody or build an ally with somebody in your organization who sort of thinks intuitively in that manner. And the HR tech ROI calculators, they're a great way to get budget. But I actually think probably the most valuable thing they are to an individual is that there's sort of like this really interesting time capsule that encapsulates how you felt about a project at a specific time. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're buying a new ATS and you're like, well, we need a new ATS because our existing ATS is just really, really hard for candidates to apply to. And we're losing 50% of candidates, right? And so we're going to go with a new modern ATS, and that's going to increase the number of candidates that we get by 100%, because if we're going from a 50% loss ratio to 0% loss ratio, and those candidates are worth ABC, they're going to decrease our cost per hire by XYZ through decreased, job board spend and internal recruiters, external recruiters, et cetera. And that's like a very valid analysis. And what's really cool is that 6, 12, 18 months from now, you can go back to that analysis and you can look at where you were right and where you were wrong. And it's kind of like if you've ever kept a journal and you've gone back 6+ months later and you're just like, what was I thinking? And in some ways you're going to be underestimating the value. And in some cases you're going to be overestimating the value. And that's just the nature of any of these predictions, right? If you need any proof of that, just look at the stock market. Every day goes up and down, crazy swings, because all these models are wrong. They're directionally right, they're thoughtful, but they can't be precise. But what's cool is that you can go back and you can say, okay, why did I think that? And what actually happened? And therefore, how does that make me a better manager, a better strategic voice in this company going forward? And you can learn from your own personal sort of journey. You can share that with your function. And most importantly, sort of a hedge on the value that your initiative actually brought. Because when you go back to get that next slug of money, that new budget for another project, the CFO invariably is going to say, well, what happened to the new ATS? And you're like, okay, yeah, let's revisit the model. We got the app to hire ratio thing, like we actually underestimated the value there. We overestimated blah, blah, blah. And so net, we still made a return on investment. It wasn't as high as we thought it would be, or it was much higher than we thought it would be, et cetera, et cetera. And at the bottom line is that the CFO is just going to be like, whoa, like you're speaking my language. Yeah, here's the money for the new initiative. Can't wait to see how this one turns out. So I personally think that doing that sort of analysis to translate what you're doing into value that the CFO understands, presenting that, getting the ally to make sure it's robust, and then revisiting that in the future for your own personal growth, as well as to, again, advocate for new budget on new initiatives is fairly essential. And with that, I will call back Enrique and we'll see if we have any questions in the chat. What's going on?
What's going on? I'm back here with you. Phil, I want to ask you something. You don't know that this happened, but I do know. I didn't want to interrupt you. I was doing the LinkedIn Live when you started. We continue talking because we're connected on Zoom, and LinkedIn Live bumped me out, and I have to recreate the link. So for everybody, I apologize for that. But this is the question related to that. I think people sometimes lack, they don't have trust. They don't trust technology because of these kind of things, right? I mean, you have all your things set up and you say, like I set up my system and I think everything should go well, but it doesn't. So how can you, when people are going to get ready to buy HR technology, what would you tell them to sort of feel that technology is reliable, but it's not perfect, and they still could go ahead? Like things could happen. Like it happened to me right now. I just quickly solved this thing and here we are back again. But what would you tell them when it comes to making these decisions, for when they know that technology can fail?
Yeah, and it can definitely fail, and it will continue to fail, which is a nice, sometimes when I talk about HR tech as well, we talk about AI, and some people are freaked out, like they're going to lose their job. And I think, the bottom line is we can't even have like a LinkedIn video stream on LinkedIn at this point without it breaking. So we don't need to worry about our jobs quite yet. But I think what you need to have a plan. You need to have fail safes, especially for things that have to work when they're live, which isn't most things, right? Like maybe your ATS goes down for a short amount of time and somebody has to come back and apply later. That's not something that's going to make or break you. I think what is interesting is to keep track of what is working and what's not, and going back to vendors and saying, look, like we lost 2 days of applicants. How can we get compensated for something like this? And that's actually like a really nice thing. If you're paying, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for a piece of software, you can totally get some compensation for when things do break. In terms of sort of vetting things on the front end to understand, how reliable is this? And especially this is true when dealing with startups. I think that there's a couple of different signals that you can look for. One would be the logos on the website and digging into, let's say some companies like, oh yeah, Amazon uses us. Okay. Who at Amazon uses it? How pervasive within the organization is it? Like, is this like one guy in one office that like once, logged into your software, or is this like a real thing? So always asking those probing questions like who, what, why, and not being embarrassed about continuing to dig in, especially if it's clear that somebody's maybe like stretching the truth a bit. That's a big thing. Looking at the number of employees on LinkedIn is actually like a pretty good signal to understand how robust technology is. If a company has, 3 employees on LinkedIn, they might have something that's really great, but you also have to realize that there's a much higher chance that that's going to go down versus a company that has even 30 employees, right? Because that's a much more real company. You can build in SLAs, service level agreements, into your contracts that say, hey, this has to have a 99.99% uptime. And if not, we kind of get our money back on this thing, or we get some sort of discount. And so that's a nice contractual way to have stuff like that built in. And then, for the stuff that you can try, And a lot of companies now, especially for SMBs, have free trials of different technologies. You should just use it and understand how well it works. And if you have a lack of confidence, like I always have with LinkedIn Live, just let everybody kind of know that that's what's going on, you know? And I think everybody sort of understands, look, like we're using Zoom right now. Zoom has, I think, 200 million people a week now are using Zoom or something crazy, and it still crashes all the time. It's buggy. People are stealing their data in Zoom. Like there's all these issues. And so
The Zoom bombing now, the Zoom bombing.
Zoom bombing, yeah, all sorts of stuff, right? It's crazy. And so I think just like having, do your homework, have a backup plan, and then just communicate in the most like honest way possible. Don't try to be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's like, no, it's Zoom's problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
nothing to apologize.
I feel a couple of questions to probably
Yep.
wrap up the presentation. Well, we still have a little bit of time. One of them is a quintessential question about ATS and technology related to recruitment, which I guess is probably the first question you get about all software, about biases and about ensuring that they are not filtering out people who are great talents because this software may be looking into, very kind of data that may not really give the best results, so to speak. So what's your thought on that?
Yeah, so I think using AI as an assist rather than a prescriptive advice is the way to do it. If a machine is smart enough to probably give you like the top half of the resume pile, the machine is probably not smart enough to give you the top 10% or the top 20% who you want to screen. So my advice, and a machine, like a very focused assessment, like if you are hiring for engineers and you send somebody like a qualified.io assessment, like that's a totally different thing. But if you're just using an ATS that's doing keyword matching, et cetera, it's really hard for it to do a better job than that. And so that's how I would use it to kind of help you triage a little bit. And then, of course, what's really nice, you mentioned bias. A lot of these applicant tracking systems now have basically blinded applications. So you're not seeing people's names, addresses, photos, et cetera. And stuff like that can actually cut down on when a human starts to go through these applications in terms of unconscious bias.
Fantastic. Got another question for you. Now, in times of coronavirus, where lots of companies are getting hit hard by by the economy of all that's going on, but they still have to operate and they still have, some decisions in their pipeline about buying some major technology. Has your criteria shifted, pre and during coronavirus when it comes to the elements that you assess to bring in HR technology to your company? Is there anything different that you analyze now that you didn't analyze before that would be a great place to start for people who are watching this LinkedIn Live and trying to make a decision these days?
That's a really good question. I think I'm a little bit slightly more biased against startups because there's a higher chance that they would go under. However, if you think of most of these vendors, like they're all recurring revenue businesses that have, they're not going to lose 80% of their business next quarter, like maybe like a travel agency would or a recruiting firm, because all of their contracts are 2 or 3 years long for the most part. And so they're all going to be fine. I would say when you're thinking about, like, I think if you have the ability to buy HR technology over the next quarter or two, you're going to be able to negotiate a much better price. And so if you're going to buy a new HRIS or a new ATS or anything in the next year, you should do it in the next quarter or two because you're going to get a much better price. And you're probably going to have better service as well because they're not going to be onboarding as many customers.
Yeah. I also I wanted to ask you from the HR tech perspective, from the provider's perspective. Even though this workshop is how to buy HR technology, there should be also one about how to sell HR technology during times of crisis. Because we got this idea, and I totally understand. That because of all that's going on, we have to focus on just providing services for free, like if we didn't need to make, some revenue to continue operating, right? And I understand the two sides of the coin. I mean, I'm not, I want to be mindful about the fact that this is the wrong time to be ripping people off or to be just focusing, like, I don't know about you, but I got a lot of messages at the very beginning of the coronavirus crisis saying, like, now that coronavirus is happening, buy this one thing. That came across really badly to me.
Yeah.
But these companies need to continue to operate, right? And they have employees and they have to pay them, they have to do what they need to do to be, sustainable in time. So how would you recommend them to approach clients that are in dire stress about their future, that they don't know if they will survive next week? So what can they do to make sure that their speech, that their script, their offering is really not only relevant in terms of the service, but also it is communicated in the way that also comes across as, with empathy and an understanding for what's going on?
Yeah, you got to read the room. Rand Fishkin of Moz fame just put together this post about how to market in the time of Corona, which I think is really good. He has a company now called SparkToro. I think you got to understand what people are going through, have a lot of empathy, and realize that, like, being like, hey, you want to jump on a demo? Like, that's probably not going to work. It's probably just going to annoy the hell out of people. And realize why that is. And then also try to figure out how to be useful. And maybe your product can be changed in small ways. I've seen a lot of vendors sort of pivot a tiny bit to be like, hey, like, here's like our Corona package that maybe it's for free. And it just sort of helps you like virtually onboard people and virtually interview them and blah, blah, blah. And so that's great. Or just putting together, like, here's some useful advice on whatever it is to your customers, right? It's kind of like content marketing 101. Like, how do you continue to be useful and empathetic throughout this crisis?
That is fantastic. We got a few people asking you for the ROI spreadsheet that you mentioned before, and the link. So, if you had a chance to connect later to the LinkedIn Live, I tagged you, so you'll see the tag, and if you can share that with everybody, or just let me know and I can send it out. Phil, before we sign off in the next minute, is there any one last thing that you would want to share with people that are getting ready to buy extra technology during these times of crisis, or people who are selling extra technology during these times of crisis? So anything that you want to share, just a last thought?
Yeah, and I'll drop a link into the HR Tech ROI thing in 2 seconds, but I think it's a great time to buy HR tech. It's a great time to buy anything if you have the cash. And so you should do that. Yeah, I think I know we've got like 1 second, so I think that's my last piece of advice. Just, you're going to get a great price. You're going to get great service. Awesome.
Well, Phil, thank you so much, everybody. This was a conversation about how to buy extra technology. I think extremely relevant, considering that our companies need to continue to operate, and they probably have a decision-making process in the pipeline to buy some extra technology. And, some of them will be able to just like hold it off for a little while, finding out what's going on, but some others really need to bring that technology. So Phil, thank you so much for sharing, the criteria and some ideas on how to, sort of approach this in the best way possible. And